There is a port in Peru, 100 miles north of Lima. Most Americans have never heard of it, but inside the Pentagon, inside the CIA, inside the White House Situation Room, this port is being called one of the single biggest strategic threats to the United States in the entire Western Hemisphere. Its name is Chancay, and China owns it. Not just Chancay. China has quietly purchased, leased, or taken control of 129 ports across nearly every continent on Earth, including ports right next to us, military bases. And America is just now waking up to what this really means. Think about that number for a second. 129 ports in 90 countries, on every continent except Antarctica, quietly, systematically, over 25 years. While the world was distracted by wars, elections, and pandemics, China was buying the world's most critical pieces of infrastructure, one port at a time. The Panama Canal, which handles 5% of all global trade, China had ports on both ends of it. The port of Piraeus in Greece, the gateway to Europe, China owns it. Darwin, Australia, right next to U.S. and Australian military bases, a Chinese company had a 99-year lease on it. And U.S. military experts now say, in wartime, China could use every single one of these ports to choke off American ships, cut global supply chains, and cripple the U.S. economy without firing a single bullet. This is not conspiracy. This is U.S. Congress testimony. This is Pentagon briefings. This is the story that keeps American generals awake at 3 a.m. And today, we are going to expose every single detail of it. You are watching Dust Glory, where we find the hidden stories that powerful governments hope you never discover. If you want the truth, subscribe right now, because what comes next will genuinely shock you. To understand how we got here, you need to understand a Chinese strategy that began quietly in the year 2000, called the Belt and Road Initiative. On the surface, Belt and Road looks like foreign aid. China offers loans to developing countries to build infrastructure, roads, railways, bridges, and yes, ports. The pitch is simple. We will build your port. You get jobs, we get a trade route. But here is what those countries were not told. A 2018 study by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that every $1 China spends on African ports yields $13 in trade back to China. The countries that accepted Chinese port money became economically dependent on China. Their trade routes, their debt, their infrastructure, all flowing through Beijing's control. From 2000 to 2025, Chinese agencies and state-owned enterprises bankrolled 363 port projects worth $24 billion across 90 countries. That is not a trade strategy. That is a global takeover, executed in slow motion over 25 years, while the world watched, and China's own military doctrine makes the purpose crystal clear. In Chinese policy-making circles, there is a term used to describe these ports: maritime strategic strongpoints. The same term, used interchangeably for both commercial ports and military installations. To Beijing, there is no difference. A port is a port, and a port can always become a military base. Of all 129 Chinese-controlled ports in the world, the one that is causing the most sleepless nights in Washington right now is a $1.3 billion megaport in the small coastal town of Chancay, Peru. In November 2024, Chinese President Xi Jinping personally flew to Peru to inaugurate this port. Not sent a representative, not sent a minister. Xi Jinping himself showed up, cut the ribbon, and called Chancay the gateway from South America to Asia. When the leader of the world's second most powerful country personally flies to a port opening, that port is not just about shipping containers. Here is why Chancay is so dangerous. It is operated exclusively by COSCO Shipping. Costco was blacklisted by the U.S. Pentagon for its close ties to the People's Liberation Army. In plain English, the company that runs Chancay has been officially identified by the United States government as connected to the Chinese military. And in February 2026, a Peruvian court ruled that the Peruvian government has no regulatory oversight over the port. None. Costco, a Chinese military-linked company, now effectively operates a strategic Pacific port in South America, with zero government supervision. The United States Department of State responded publicly, saying Peru could be powerless to oversee Chancay, and adding, cheap Chinese money costs sovereignty. And military experts issued a stark warning. In wartime, China will not allow its port to service American ships. In a Taiwan conflict, Chancay could be used to resupply Chinese Navy warships operating in the Eastern Pacific, just miles from U.S. territory. This is not hypothetical. This is the scenario U.S. military planners are actively gaming right now. Now, let's talk about the fight that has been dominating Washington, the battle over the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal handles 5% of all global seaborne trade. Every year, roughly 14,000 ships pass through it. It connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Control the canal, and you have your hand on the throat of global commerce. For years, a Hong Kong-based company called CK Hutchison Holdings operated ports on both ends of the Panama Canal, both ends, on the Pacific side and the Atlantic side. Donald Trump was furious. He publicly accused China of controlling the canal. His defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, flew to Panama in April 2025 and stated, on camera, "The United States will not allow Communist China or any other country to threaten the operation or safety of the canal." Under enormous pressure, CK Hutchison agreed to sell its Panama ports and 43 other ports worldwide to a consortium led by American firm BlackRock in a deal valued at $22.8 billion. Victory for America? Not so fast. Beijing stepped in to delay and block the deal. Chinese regulators launched their own review. China ordered Costco to stop shipping to Balboa Port in Panama as a pressure tactic. And analysts warned, even if BlackRock gets the Panama ports, China's Chancay in Peru becomes even more important as China's primary Latin American foothold. The U.S. might win this battle, but China already has the next position ready. Here is the part that will make your jaw drop. Darwin, Australia. A port city on Australia's northern coast, home to joint U.S.-Australian military facilities, where American Marines are rotated through regularly as part of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. In 2015, the Australian government granted a 99-year lease on the port of Darwin to a Chinese company called Landbridge Group. 99 years, right next to U.S. military infrastructure, handed to a Chinese company for nearly a century. When the Obama administration found out, they were described as stunned. The U.S. had not been consulted. A critical piece of strategic real estate adjacent to American military assets had been sold to China while Washington wasn't watching. By 2024, the United States had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in building new Air Force facilities in Darwin, specifically as part of efforts to counter China's growing presence in the Indo-Pacific. Think about the absurdity of that situation. America building military bases in Darwin to counter China, while a Chinese company holds a 99-year lease on the port right next door. In May 2025, a U.S. firm was finally seeking to acquire Darwin from the Chinese company. 10 years later, the damage, in terms of intelligence gathering and strategic positioning, already done. Let's travel to Europe, where China's port strategy executed its most significant European coup, the port of Piraeus, Greece's main port, the largest port in the Mediterranean, the gateway through which goods flow in and out of the entire European continent. In 2016, China's Costco purchased a controlling stake in Piraeus for €368 million. Greece, drowning in debt, took the money. The EU and Greece's international creditors had actually made the sale a precondition for fresh bailout loans. Greece was forced to sell its most strategic port to survive economically, and COSCO made it work. Revenue at Piraeus more than doubled under Chinese management, reaching 231 million euros in 2024. But today, officials in Brussels and Washington call it one of the greatest strategic blunders in European history. A former American ambassador to Greece said, "Piraeus was a wake-up call. It took a while for the U.S. to perceive China's move as a strategic challenge, because Piraeus is not just a commercial port, it is the entry point for Chinese goods flooding into Europe. It is a listening post. It is a potential staging ground, and today, roughly 1/10 of all European port capacity is in Chinese hands." Europe, the most powerful economic bloc in the world, gave away 10% of its port infrastructure to China for money, and now it cannot get it back. Now we get to the part that the U.S. military is most afraid of. What actually happens if America and China go to war? Military analyst Gordon Chang, one of America's leading China experts, put it plainly: in times of war, China will not allow its port operations to load, unload, or service American ships or ships coming from or going to U.S. ports. Think about what that means. If there is a military conflict over Taiwan, the U.S. Navy needs to move ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Panama Canal. But China controls ports on both ends of the canal. China could effectively lock down the most important naval route in the Western Hemisphere. U.S. military experts testified to Congress in February 2025. China's ability to close down the Panama Canal could make the difference in Taiwan holding out against a PLA invasion or blockade. And it gets worse. In December 2025, a Chinese Navy ship called the Silk Road Ark showed up in the Caribbean Sea, making port calls in Jamaica and Barbados. This brought the Chinese military vessel within miles of major U.S. military operations in the region. U.S. researchers who analyzed Chinese port data found something chilling. More than half of all ports with Chinese ownership stakes have also hosted Chinese Navy ship visits. The line between commercial ports and military assets is effectively non-existent. China has built, over 25 years, a global military network disguised as a global trade network. And the disguise is now wearing thin. So what is America doing about this? The answer is complicated. In February 2025, the U.S. Congress introduced the Strategic Ports Reporting Act, a bipartisan bill requiring federal agencies to identify and report on foreign-controlled ports near U.S. military assets. That this bill was needed in 2025, after China spent 25 years buying 129 ports, tells you how far behind America already is. In April 2024, the U.S. Trade Representative launched a broad investigation into China's actions, policies, and practices aimed at dominating the global maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors. Their conclusion? China's actions were, quote, unreasonable and imposed a burden or restriction on U.S. commerce. The U.S. Development Finance Corporation tried to counter China's Sri Lanka port by backing a $500 million competing port agreement in Colombo. The deal fell through. China's ports stayed. The pattern is consistent. America reacts. China had already planned the next move. One U.S. analyst put it starkly: the U.S. has a long way to go if it wants to fight over every port China has financed. China bankrolled 363 port projects worth $24 billion across 90 countries. America cannot buy them all back. The strategy that should have been deployed in 2005 cannot be fully executed in 2025. Some battles, once lost, cannot be won back. If you live in America, here is why this affects you personally. Your economy. Roughly 90% of all global trade moves by sea. Everything you buy, electronics, clothing, food, medicine, passes through ports somewhere in its journey to your home. If China controls enough of those ports, China controls prices, China controls supply, China controls what is available in your stores and what isn't, your security. Every Chinese-controlled port near U.S. military assets is a potential intelligence-gathering operation. Chinese port technology, cranes, software systems, port management platforms can be used to collect data on military shipments, troop movements, and naval operations. U.S. security agencies have already flagged Chinese-made port cranes as potential surveillance devices. Your future, the country that controls global shipping lanes, controls the 21st century economy. China understood this in the year 2000. America is understanding it now, in 2025. And in that 25-year gap, China built a global port empire worth $24 billion that stretches from Peru to Greece to Australia and covers nearly every continent on Earth. This is the most important geopolitical story of the 21st century that most Americans have never heard. Until now. Let's land the plane. China did not invade anyone. China did not fire a single missile. China did not threaten any country with war. China simply offered money to countries that needed it to build ports, one at a time, for 25 years. And the result? 129 ports, 90 countries, $24 billion invested, a global network that spans every ocean, every continent, every strategic choke point on Earth. Built legally, built openly, built while the world watched and did nothing. The port of Chancay, right in America's backyard, inaugurated by Xi Jinping himself. The Panama Canal, where China had both ends until America pushed back. Darwin, Australia, 99 years. Piraeus, Greece, the gateway to Europe. This is not a future threat. This is a present reality. And the question America must now answer is whether it is too late to reverse 25 years of Chinese strategic planning, one port at a time. History will record this as either the moment America woke up just in time, or the moment America realized it was already too late. This is Dust Glory, where we find the stories that shape your world, whether you know it or not. If this video changed how you see the world, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this with every American who needs to know. Because the hidden stories never stop, and neither do we.